Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. Are we willing to get rid of the Man United boys ahead of Nottingham Forest at home? Who are the ideal Gabriel replacements in defence? And who are the new penalty takers in the Premier League this season? All of this and much more in today's Hot Topics video ahead of Game Week 3. So the first thing we're going to take a look at today is Gabriel replacements. Now, to much of our surprise, he was also dropped from the starting 11 in Game Week 2. Obviously, Game Week 1, he wasn't in the starting 11, and it was a massive shock to most managers. Now, I think a lot of us thought he'd come back in Game Week 2. However, that wasn't the case. Arteta, after the match, for what it's worth, does say that Gabriel isn't for sale, and he will be getting a lot of minutes this year. So there is still hope that he might even start in Game Week 3. However, being burnt twice in a row isn't ideal, and I think anyone who still owns Gabriel will be pretty keen to get rid of him despite some good fixtures to come and despite the fact he's already scored 3 goals against Fulham in his career. So obviously we're going to have a look at who the ideal replacements might be for Gabriel. First up, I think Ben Chilwell, if you can still reach that sort of price point, if you've got about 1 million in the bank, is the ideal replacement for Gabriel. He goes up against Luton at home, and despite the fact he came off around the 60-minute mark in Game Week 2, I still think he's the best defender with the chance of an attacking return in Game Week 3, and against Luton at home is a pretty good chance of a clean sheet as well. He's also a great long-term hold with Chelsea's fixtures all the way to Game Week 7 or 8, looking really strong as well. While we're talking about Chelsea assets, I have also put Malo Gusto on this list at number 5. The reason he's a little bit lower ranked is because I still feel that Reece James isn't a million miles away from coming back in. It might be about a month, but overall, we're probably going to want to get rid of that 4 million defender who's taking up a spot and not starting for us in our teams in 3 or 4 game weeks time if Reece James does come back in. In the meantime, he looks like a great asset, but I don't want to lock myself out and give myself a bit of a struggle to get back to a second Chelsea defender in the future if I've got him locked in my team at 4 million. It's quite hard to hop off of him later on without having to burn 2 transfers at once. However, in the short term, Malo Gusto is a great option. 4 million for a starting Chelsea right back is fantastic value for money, so I have no hesitation in recommending him for the foreseeable. Just have that exit plan ready in 3 or 4 game weeks time if Reece James is to come back in. Second on my list at the moment is William Saliba. Now obviously a lot of managers have been eyeing up that direct replacement for Gabriel, considering the fixtures are still looking really positive for Arsenal. Now, again, I don't think that's a bad transfer whatsoever. His goal threat isn't quite as high as Gabriel, but he does look nailed into that side. At least that's what we all think at the moment. So I think William Saliba is one of the top recommendations I would have for a replacement for Gabriel at the moment. The only problem is obviously Saliba has risen in price and Gabriel has now gone down to 4.9 million overnight. So you have to make sure that you've got that little bit in the bank to make that move. But if you do, I still would recommend that quite highly if you already haven't gotten Ben Chilwell. One player you won't need to have any money in the bank for is Destiny Udogie. Now at number 3 on my rankings, I still think he's a great option, and if you can't afford the likes of Chilwell or Saliba, or you've already got them in your side, I think Udogie is a great option for the foreseeable future. The next 3 game weeks are looking really positive for Tottenham, and he looks like he's getting himself into pretty advanced central positions in attack. So I think he might get the odd attacking return in there as well as the odd clean sheet over the next few games. At 4.5 million, he's great value for money. I would be ever so slightly nervous about him getting rotated once or twice in the future, but there's no reason to suggest that that would happen. It's more of a gut feeling at the moment that I think he's probably going to get rested at some point for the likes of Perisic. At 4.5 million, he's an easy rotate, and in my side, I've already got Udogie and I'm using him as my 12th man week in, week out at the moment. So for the foreseeable future, I really like him as an option, with that little asterisk that maybe some rotation will come in the future at some point. But he started both matches at the moment so far, got taken off around the 68th, 69th minute in the most recent 2-0 win against Man United. Looked really good in that game as well, so I'm very happy to recommend him for the foreseeable future. Finally, in a few game weeks' time, I might recommend Vardiol a little bit higher on this ranking, but because he's only started 1 game in the league so far for City, I'm still a little bit nervous about him having that regular starting space. Now, obviously, he's a very big money signing for City, so I expect him to eventually hold down a starting spot in that 11 week in, week out, but as we know, City are prone to rotation, and because he's such a new asset to their team, he might get worked in slowly. The fixtures for City are are absolutely fantastic. So if you don't have a Man City defensive coverage so far, looking at the likes of Akanji, Walker or Vardiol could all be really good options. And I think I'm recommending him more highly than the others, mainly because I think that over the longevity of the season, he's going to be a better asset and he'll be more nailed into that team than the likes of Akanji, Ake or Walker. However, in the short term, those options might be really good value for money and you might be able to make the most of City's good fixtures to come. So I'd have no hesitation in recommending any of the City boys in that way, but do be a little bit cautious in regards to rotation because as we know, City are always likely to rotate. Let me know in the comments below if you're looking to replace Gabriel and if so, which option you're looking at in defence at the moment. One key question a lot of managers are asking this week is whether or not we can get rid of the Man United assets. Fernandes and Rashford both haven't returned so far in the Premier League, and Man United in general don't look fantastic at the moment. Obviously, we're spending a lot of money in our midfields to get these two assets in. Quite a few of us have both of them as well, so that's 17.5 million spent in our sides without getting any sort of attacking returns so far. Nottingham Forest at home next up in game week 3 does look like a good fixture. Nottingham Forest have been using that low block really effectively so far, and even against Arsenal away from home, they still managed to not even concede one whole XG in that match. So their defence is looking fairly tight this year, and Man United might struggle to break them down. I think out of the two assets, the more likely player to break them down is probably Bruno Fernandes. He does drop deep and he will be trying to pick that lock and try to release the likes of Marcus Rashford, Garnacho, Sancho or Antony in behind. The underlying data for Bruno is also looking really positive. He's got one of the highest underlying data points in the league so far this year, combining to 0.98 XGI per 90. As you can see, that is more weighted towards the assists, but he does look due a return and he was unlucky not to get anything in the previous game week against Tottenham. He also could have had a penalty as well, which obviously undoubtedly would have been even greater XG to his name as well. So Bruno Fernandes does look slightly unlucky not to have returned so far, but I do still completely understand why managers would be looking to sell him. Rashford, on the other hand, does look to be struggling a lot more in that central number 9 role, so I'd expect him to move over to the left fairly imminently. It looks like Højlund might be in the squad this weekend against Nottingham Forest. Whether or not he starts is up for debate, but I think Rashford will start to be played out on the left very, very soon, where he is much more effective. His underlying data so far isn't absolutely awful, but it's not strong enough to warrant having a 9 million asset in your team. The one thing that would maybe make me slightly nervous about selling Marcus Rashford this week is it is still a good fixture, and the fact that he's so highly owned at the moment could mean that any sellers could get punished really drastically. I think if you don't have Bryan Mbeumo at the moment, it's really tempting to maneuver one of these assets across to him this week ahead of Crystal Palace at home. He is on penalties. He's got great underlying data even without the penalties as well at the moment, so he does look like a fairly simple switch. However, I am still cautious to sell either of these assets ahead of a good home fixture for Man United, and I think in the past, playing FPL for quite a few seasons now, having a quality player like either Bruno Fernandes or Rashford in your side 2 game weeks isn't really enough data to suggest that they've gone off the boil and they're not good assets anymore. We've got seasons and seasons of proof that both of these players are really strong FPL assets. I did initially give myself 3 weeks with them before looking at manoeuvring them in game week 4 when they go up against Arsenal and then Brighton back to back. So I think this week I might look at holding both of them personally in my team unless something comes out in the next few days that really convinces me to sell one of them for Bryan Mbeumo, who I don't currently have in my side. I think for me in my team, I'd be looking at manoeuvring Bryan Mbeumo in for one of these two assets next game week in game week 4 after I've had a little bit more data and a little bit more time to look at which of these two assets I want to get rid of first and that Nottingham Forest fixture is out of the way. However, I know a lot of you will have different opinions on this, so please let me know in the comments below what you're planning on doing with the Man United assets ahead of game week 3 and whether or not you're looking at selling them in the weeks to come, if not this week. Hey everyone, just pausing the video really quickly to say a massive thank you for all your support on the channel so far. If you're enjoying the video today, please do remember to hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. It would really be appreciated. Anyway, back to the video. Game week 2 was pretty big for penalties in FPL, and there are quite a few controversial talking points that we should probably run through. Saka, importantly, looks like he might be off penalties now. Arteta, after the match, did come out and say it was a surprise to him that Ødegaard took the penalty ahead of Saka, and Saka simply gifted it to Martin Ødegaard. I'm not so sure that that actually is the case, and I think that a meticulous manager like Mikel Arteta will have known full well that his preferred penalty taker would be Martin Ødegaard going forward, and I think it's slightly mind games to say that Saka just gifted it to him. So I think moving forward, Martin Ødegaard is probably going to be the penalty taker for Arsenal. And does that dampen Saka's appeal in FPL moving forwards? I think maybe slightly it does. However, at 8.5 million, he is still going to be good value for money. And with the fixtures coming up, I don't think he's going to be a priority sell. And I wouldn't be hopping straight across to Martin Ødegaard, even though they're around the same price just yet. Maybe it's one of those in the future we can have a look at swapping if the data does suggest that Martin Ødegaard is now the superior FPL asset all round. But it is an interesting thing to take a look at, and if you already have Martin Ødegaard, you'll be absolutely chuffed with the fact that he now seems to be also on penalties. The second player that looks like he's no longer on penalties at the moment is Ollie Watkins. Now, I'll go into striker transfers a little bit later on in the episode. However, Ollie Watkins being off of penalties is certainly not a good thing for him. So I think it does dampen his FPL prospects ever so slightly, although maybe less so than it would for other penalty prospects because they've got better penalty records than he does. Douglas Luiz now seems to be on penalties for Aston Villa, so that might make him an ever so slightly better FPL asset. However, I think overall he's probably not a player that we're looking at in our sides at the moment, especially considering the amount of FPL midfielders that are taking our fancy at the moment. Interestingly, both Salah and Enzo Fernandez missed their penalties over the weekend. Salah obviously did score the rebound, but it is important to note that he's got a fairly patchy record with penalties over the last year and a half, and there are some really good penalty takers in situ at Liverpool at the moment. So a few people are wondering whether Alexis Mac Allister might eventually take over penalties for Liverpool. For what it's worth, I think Salah is so goal hungry and such a leader in that team that he will continue to step up and take penalties for Liverpool, especially because he did actually go and score the rebound at the weekend. But it is worth keeping an eye on that in the future for a £12.5 million asset in midfield. If he does get taken off of penalties, that will seriously dampen his prospects as an FPL asset. So it's one to monitor. I think if you've got Salah at the moment, I wouldn't worry too much. I think he'll still be on penalties for the next one, but if he misses again, then Alexis Mac Allister will fancy his chances at stepping up for the next one after that. Enzo Fernandez took his first penalty for Chelsea at the weekend and obviously missed it. I think he probably will step up one more time before being taken off of penalty duty, but there are other penalty takers in that lineup. Reece James, when he's back fit and firing, is always one that I'm keen to take a look at because in previous seasons, under previous management, he has been touted as a potential penalty taker, usually second or third on the list for Chelsea. So for a 5.5 million defender, if he does eventually get penalties, he could be fantastic value for money and probably even more appealing than the likes of Ben Chilwell. However, for the time being, he is injured and I do expect Enzo Fernandez to step up again. However, do keep an eye on that because it might not be long before we see another new penalty taker at Chelsea. Another position that's going to be really popular for transfers this week is that second forward spot alongside Erling Haaland. A lot of managers either have João Pedro or Ollie Watkins. Now, João Pedro obviously benched this weekend, came off the bench, got a yellow card, 0-pointer, not ideal for owners, and at 5.6 million, if you don't have money in the bank, it's quite hard to move off of him. Now, with João Pedro in mind to start with, the three options that I would recommend this week all cost more money. So it's important to note that if you don't have that spare money, that I'd probably just hold on to João Pedro for the time being, try to maneuver money elsewhere so that you can set up a future transfer in another game week. At 5.6 million, there aren't many options around that mark, so I think eventually he's going to be a sell. But for the time being, I think he will get at least minutes in the next few game weeks, and he might even start once again this game week in game week 3. If you are going to sell him, the three options on the screen that I'd recommend start off with Nicholas Jackson. Obviously, you need another 1.5 million to get up to Nicholas Jackson, so if you don't have that already, then don't worry so much. However, Nicholas Jackson, even without returning any goals so far, For me, I think he looks like a really promising FPL pick. I recommended him earlier this week in the watchlist video, so do check out my extended thoughts on him in that video. His underlying data alongside the fixture list to come makes Jackson a really popular pick, and I'd also even look at downgrading Ollie Watkins to him this week. That is one transfer that I'm eyeing up potentially for the weekend. A player that is a little bit easier to get to from Joao Pedro is Johan Wissa. Now, 6.1 million for a striker that is getting 70-80 minutes in a really attacking Brentford side at the moment and is getting great underlying data does look fantastic value for money. You'd only need 0.6 million to get up from Joao Pedro to Johan Wissa at the moment. So I think if you don't have the money in the bank for the likes of Jackson or Alvarez, Wissa could be a really good option. I think the one thing I'd note is I don't really fancy the double up too much at the moment on Brentford at the moment. So if you've got Bryan Mbeumo, or if you're looking to get to Bryan Mbeumo, I'd urge a little bit more caution, because I think there are great options in other teams and I wouldn't overextend my hand on Brentford and take up two attacking options, or two attacking spots rather, in your lineup just for the likes of Brentford when they look like they're going to be sharing the goals around a little bit, and I wouldn't expect 3 or 4 goals every single week from them. Finally, Julian Alvarez is another player I'm seriously considering for the weeks ahead. Now, City always going to be rotation threats, but it looks like City don't have too many options in those attacking spots at the moment, especially with Kevin De Bruyne out. Now, Julian Alvarez might not lead the line as well as Erling Haaland does, but I think even playing off of him or playing in that number 8 role, he is still effective enough to make good value for money out of 6.6 million. Again, you'll need that 1 million in the bank to get from Joao Pedro to Alvarez, but I think if you've got the money to get to him rather than Nicholas Jackson, I don't think it's the end of the world whatsoever, especially considering the fixtures to come for Man City. Again, a little bit like I was saying with Johan Wissa, if you've got Phil Foden or are looking at getting Phil Foden, then I'd probably make it an either or situation. I wouldn't pile in on both of them, because I'd like to try and keep one spot free for Man City assets, potentially in defence for the next few game weeks, if you don't already have that spot covered, of course. Obviously, all of us, or pretty much all of us, have Erling Haaland, so having both Alvarez and Foden alongside him would be really good in terms of attacking threat, but I'd always be slightly hesitant that one of them would get benched, and then also you wouldn't get that defensive coverage, and City look like by far the best defence in the league at the moment. As I mentioned earlier on in the video, Ollie Watkins probably isn't a hard sell for me, and he's a player that I'm really debating at the moment. Off of penalties does dent his appeal, but he is going to still tick over really nicely in the coming game weeks. The fixture list doesn't look so great on paper for the next 3 or 4 weeks, but Burnley and Liverpool in the next 2 I don't think is as bad as it might look on paper, especially that Liverpool fixture. They do play a high line and they do look like they're going to concede goals at the moment. So Ollie Watkins plays off that high line really, really well, and I do expect him to get some chances in behind against that Liverpool back line. I think the main thing for me with Ollie Watkins is, despite the fact I expect him to tick over and get the odd goal or assist over the next 3 or 4 fixtures, can I get more value elsewhere from the likes of Jackson, Wissa or Alvarez? I think out of all of those options, at the moment, I'm most tempted by Nicholas Jackson. I think he is leading the line quite well for Chelsea despite no attacking returns at the moment, and because of those fixtures, especially in game week 3, ahead of Luton at home, I think it's a really good time to jump on him before he actually starts returning goals and getting points, before other managers jump on him inevitably in a few game weeks time. However, if you're looking at selling Joao Pedro, looking at Wissa or Alvarez might be really good options as well, especially if you don't have the money in the bank to make that direct swap across to Nicholas Jackson, but you might have just about enough to make one of the other 2 moves. Let me know in the comments which of those 3 strikers you're eyeing up ahead of game week 3, if at all, and if you're looking at selling the likes of Pedro or Ollie Watkins this week, or whether or not you're going to give them that little bit longer to impress you in your FPL sides. One final quick note from me today, and it's all about planning ahead in FPL. Now, game week 3, a lot of us have 2 free transfers this week after rolling in game week 2. I'm definitely one of those, and I was really tempted as soon as I saw game week 3 pop up with my 2 free transfers to use both of them this week. However, looking at the fixtures ahead, I think it might be quite a wise play to just use one this week if you can, and try and save that second free transfer, roll it into game week 4, especially considering the fixtures ahead. Game week 3, I think most of us have some really strong looking sides. Arsenal, Man United, Chelsea, Man City, all having really good games this week. Even Brighton and Aston Villa and Brentford all teams that we've got a lot of players from at the moment all have pretty strong, favourable fixtures this game week. However, in game week 4, the fixtures do turn for a few sides. Brighton going up against Newcastle isn't the easiest fixture, so you might want to look at manoeuvring Brighton assets out, and Arsenal and Man United go up against each other as well. So there's a lot more that you might want to do with your side in game week 4, and having those 2 free transfers that game week might be much better to use than using them in game week 3, even though it is quite tempting. Do let me know what your transfer plans are ahead of game week 3 and whether or not you're looking at rolling that second free transfer into game week 4 if you've got 2 at the moment. So those are the hot topics ahead of game week 3. Hopefully I've helped to answer a few of your questions ahead of the deadline. If you've got any more questions, please do leave them in the comments below and I will try to answer all of them ahead of the Friday deadline. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you tomorrow for my team selection ahead of game week 3.